I was in favour of Brexit, yeah.
Why?
Mainly because I didn't think the year was going to survive anyway.
Steve Keen, Australiër, econoom. De man die de crisis wel aan zag komen en niet bekend staat om zijn milde uitspraken. De Brexit was dus goed omdat de euro het toch niet gaat redden. Auw, gordels om voor het vervolg.
The club's motto was fabulous, growth and stability. Done pretty well on that front, hasn't it? Bringing Europe together, reducing national divisions, convergence. What a load of crock compared to what it's actually achieved. You've got 25% unemployment in Greece, 5% in Germany. That's not at all convergence. You've got people at each other's throats now, national conflicts like we haven't seen for 60 years. And you have absolutely stagnant economy with the worst economic performance of any major region on the planet. But it's only a matter of time before one of the European countries leaves the euro, which would totally break the whole thing apart. If Le Pen wins in France, that's the end of the euro. If Beppe wins in Italy, that would be shaking the foundations of the euro. So let's get out before it collapses. This to me is the comeuppance for the left of getting involved in identity politics at one extreme and leaving economics for the economists on the other. Is the left is so obsessed about doing things properly that it never does anything. Whereas the right basically wants to get something done and doesn't care whether it treads on toes in the process. So the reality is, unfortunately, that most of the time you get a revolt against this stuff, it'll be a right-wing revolt. And that's what you got out of Trump, you got out of Marine Le Pen. But tough shit. The left actually lost the argument by focusing on that alone and not focusing on the economics at a serious level of depth. The crazy thing is, you can find people from as progressive a position as Wynne Godley and as reactionary position as Milton Friedman, as economists, both saying you should never reform this thing in the way you did in the first place. Writing in 1992, Wynne Godley said that if you've designed a system that only has a central bank, it has severe restrictions on government spending. When government spending is not the problem, when you have your own national currency, but it makes it a problem when you don't have a national currency. And Milton Friedman at the other extreme said you need to have so many common elements to make a common currency area work, like a common language and free movement of goods and so on and so forth within that region, and you take your welfare payments with you when you move. He said Europe doesn't have that, and new design doesn't enable it to have that. It's going to fail. So you're ignoring the dynamics of private sector borrowing. You're constraining what the government can do. You've taken away the capacity to devalue. You put the economy in not one but two straitjackets. You've got a straitjacket about no exchange rate movements anymore. You've got a double straitjacket saying no fiscal policy either, and you expect the system to work. He said, now that can only work if capitalism is a stable system. Since it's not, when a crisis occurs, there is nothing to stop it suffering a process of terminal decline, leading to emigration as the only alternative to starvation or poverty. The people who are keeping it going are committed to making a failure succeed without changing why the failure is a failure. If it's been wiped out by its first major challenge, then it was never going to work in the first place, and you have to redesign it. And the easiest way is for a country like Italy to pull out and re-establish the lira, to limit all its domestic debts in lira and write off all its foreign debts and start all over again.
De grote Europese belofte, economische groei en stabiliteit. Landen die economisch naar elkaar toe groeien. Maar helaas werd het iets anders. Werkeloosheid, slechte economische prestaties, grote economische verschillen tussen landen. En volgens Keen heeft links zich in Europa te veel laten leiden door identiteitspolitiek en heeft het de economie laten liggen. De verandering komt nu van de populisten van rechts. Wen er maar aan.
The real cause of the crisis globally was a debt bubble, which burst. When it burst in those countries, the asset boom it had set off collapsed, like in Spain, as well as in America, and Ireland, as well as America. So too much private credit beforehand, far too much private debt, and then a crash in private spending, that's what caused the slump. The thing which I know that most people who don't study economics are stunned by when they first find it out is that economists don't include money in their models. They think economists are experts on money, and they literally do not include money in their models. So only when there's a crisis in capitalism do people take critiques of the theory of capitalism seriously. The theory was bullshit.
De belangrijkste oorzaak van de huidige crisis: schuld. Oh ja, volgens Keen snappen economen over het algemeen weinig van geld.
Credit's an essential part of capitalism. You can't imagine capitalism, it can't exist without money, banks and debt. It's also cyclical, this is a very cyclical system. So if you take some point in that cycle when the economy's had a crisis in the past but has recovered, then the longer you go from that period of crisis, the more people's expectations relax from the fear of it happening again. And what happens is you get rising expectations out of a stable period of growth. When the rising expectations hit, people are willing to borrow more money and banks are willing to lend more money, and also enabling investment to occur, productive investment. You get a positive feedback that's for a while is a positive cycle, but it goes beyond that stage where people develop what Minsky called euphoric expectations. Then they're willing to finance virtually anything. They start financing crap projects that are going to lose money straight away. When the boom starts to reach its peak, the capitalists are getting less than they expected because they're paying more to workers and more to raw material supply providers. Their profit expectations aren't met, they stop investing and the economy turns down again. So you get a model of a series of cycles. So that was Minsky's basic hypothesis. So I built a model of it very simply by taking a cyclical model that Richard Goodwin did and adding debt to it and saying rather than capitalists investing all their profits, which is what Goodwin had, capitalists invest more than their profits during a boom and less during a slump, and they make up the difference by borrowing money. One striking characteristic of it was that it generated a great moderation before a crisis.
Met de Great Moderation wordt een periode bedoeld die ergens in het midden van de jaren 80 van de vorige eeuw begon. Economen zagen dat de pieken en de dalen van lonen, inflatie en ook het bruto nationaal product afnamen en begonnen te geloven dat stabiliteit de norm was en grote crises zich niet meer zouden aandienen.
And that was just, that wasn't part of Minsky's hypothesis, it wasn't part of what I expected to see either. So that quite surprised me. So when the Great Moderation started to happen, in a way it was, you're being ignored because the economy's looking great. It was also saying, well, I think you're walking into a trap here because my model generates this before a crisis. And the first time I showed it to any of my staff, he said, Steve, if you've identified something that actually exists in capitalism, we're in deep, deep trouble. And I then downloaded the data from the Federal Reserve, looked at the same thing, another exponential rate of increase, so I thought the crisis has to be happening. And at least, somebody has to warn about it, and at least in Australia I was that somebody. So in December of 2005 I started going on the media warpath. So yes, it was isolating to be ignored during that period, but it was literally running the script that my thesis had predicted just before it began.
Steve Keen gebruikt de theorie van de beroemde econoom Hyman Minsky. De essentie van de theorie is dat aan het einde van een lange periode van groei euforische verwachtingen ontstaan over de economie en dat schuldgedreven speculatie hand over hand toeneemt. Totdat de boel in elkaar klapt. Keen maakte zijn eigen modellen en zag rond 2005 dat de boel binnen enkele jaren in elkaar zou storten. Zijn waarschuwende woorden werden totaal genegeerd, maar hij kreeg wel gelijk.
I say, if you want to explain how things are going to happen, show me the money. And when you take a look and show the money about what happens with austerity, you say, okay, so your idea is to make the economy grow by destroying part of its money supply. Okay? And then when people realize that, there's a chance for a shift. But the trouble is, the public itself has been so convinced that they would oppose anybody who run a deficit as wasting our money. They're making your money. They might be using it on bad projects, but they're making the money you use. Let's actually go through the money on that one. If you drop the accounts of the central bank, it's got assets on one side and it can create the assets as it likes. If it issues bonds, it's created assets on that side. On the other side, it has its liabilities, which effectively the reserves of any institution which is allowed to have an account at the central bank, which is basically banks. Now, if the Federal Reserve buys mortgage-backed securities and the like and government bonds off the private banks, then those private banks get cash, which turns up in their reserve accounts, so their non-income earning assets go up. Their income earning assets go down. They're now on the books of the central bank. So what do the banks do with that money? They're going to try to put it back into assets again. Where does the money turn up in? Back in their reserve accounts again. So the reserve accounts go up, it puts pressure on the banks to buy other assets, which drive up asset prices. But there's no money that actually gets into the real economy except through this asset purchases, which ends up in the finance sector, making the finance sector even wealthier. They sell the bonds they've got, their income and assets go down, their cash reserves go up. They spend the cash reserves buying more financial assets, again inflating the asset market. Now, when they do that, some of the companies, they buy those assets off, pay their workers, and I can't call them workers, pay their brokers large amounts of money. The brokers then buy fancy cars, and the dealer gets money from selling the fancy car, and we get money from cleaning the windshield. So in that sense, you get a trickle of this money being created by quantitative easing, turning up on the real economy, which is why you have seen a bit of a revival. But you couldn't find a more ineffective way to piss your money up against a wall and let it trickle down to provide water for somebody at the bottom than doing QE that way.
Steve is dus niet heel erg positief over het monetaire beleid van de Europese Centrale Bank. De ECB pompt nu maandelijks 80 miljard in het systeem, maar de enigen die daar echt van profiteren zijn de bankiers. Wij mogen, als we geluk hebben, de ramen schoonmaken van hun nieuwe auto's. Conclusie? De ECB pist vruchteloos tegen een muur.
So you've got to reduce the debt somehow. So I'd use QE to do that. I'd make a per capita payment equally to all people with a bank account, paying it into their bank accounts. If people have debt accounts, then it first of all goes to pay their debt down. If people don't have debt, then they get a cash injection. And the whole idea would be to use the central bank's money creation capability to cancel a lot of credit-based money and then get us back to the stage where we have a low level of debt, private debt encumbering the real economy again, and we can once again have both people spending their own money more freely, but also people can take on credit once more without being worried about whether they can repay their debt bills.
Om de grootste economische problemen op te lossen, moeten volgens Keen de private schulden omlaag. De ECB kan heel goed helpen door de miljarden die ze maandelijks creëren niet aan de bankiers te geven, maar aan burgers als u en ik. Ja, dat is gratis geld. Daarmee kunnen we onze schulden afbouwen en de economie stimuleren door dat geld weer uit te geven. Zo zie je maar. Je kunt dus ook heel vrolijk worden van deze hard-hitting Aussie econoom.